Sure. Here's section 1, expanded naturally and engagingly to hook the viewer, about 700 words, flowing smoothly without a conclusion or summary. Ever had one of those mornings where you wake up, peek outside, and see the world completely covered in snow? Like a soft, white blanket has wrapped everything up tight: trees, cars, sidewalks, even your driveway. It's quiet and peaceful at first, almost magical. You might imagine sipping a warm cup of coffee, enjoying the calm before the day really begins. That's exactly how my morning started. I rolled out of bed, opened the curtains, and smiled at the thick layer of fresh snow on the ground. It was the kind of snow that makes everything look clean and new. I live in a neighborhood where winters can get harsh, but this snowstorm was supposed to be light, nothing too crazy. Just enough to make the streets look pretty and maybe slow traffic down for a bit. I wasn't in any hurry that day. No work meetings, no appointments, just a quiet Saturday to relax and catch up on things around the house. I figured I'd go outside later and shovel my driveway, maybe clear a path so I could drive out if I wanted. Simple stuff. But little did I know, this calm morning was about to take a sharp turn. Right across the street from me lives Karen. You know the type, the kind of neighbor who watches everything, always ready to complain or make a fuss. The Karen everyone warns you about. She's not exactly the friendly type. In fact, she seems to enjoy stirring up trouble just as much as she enjoys her morning coffee. At first, I thought we got along okay, but over time, it became clear she has a real knack for drama. And snowstorms. Well, she's got a whole other level of obsession when it comes to controlling the neighborhood. So, as I was still waking up and enjoying the quiet, I noticed a plow truck coming down our street. Not the city snowplow, but one from the HOA, hired to clear the common areas. Usually, they're pretty efficient and careful about where they dump the snow. But that day, something was off. Within minutes, I saw the truck stop right in front of my house. And then I noticed what was happening. The driver started pushing a huge pile of snow directly into my driveway. At first, I blinked, thinking maybe it was an accident or a moment of confusion. But then I saw Karen standing nearby, giving the driver a thumbs up. That's when it hit me, this wasn't a mistake. She had deliberately instructed the plow to bury my driveway under a massive heap of snow. I was trapped before I even had the chance to get out of bed. The pile was huge, big enough to block my car completely, and probably to keep me stuck there for hours, maybe longer. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting my face, and looked at the snowy barricade in front of my garage. It was like a wall, smooth and tall, blocking every inch of my driveway. I thought, is she seriously doing this? But I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I called out politely, "Hey Karen, what's going on here?" No response. Just the cold crunch of snow under my boots. A few neighbors came out, curious about the noise and the big snow pile. Some whispered among themselves, wondering if the HOA had gone too far this time. But I knew the truth. Karen wanted to make a point. Maybe she thought I'd get the message, maybe it was because I had recently spoken up about some HOA rules or raised concerns about her behavior. Whatever it was, this snow pile was her way of saying, "You're not welcome." At that moment, I had a choice. I could wait it out, hope the snow melted, or the HOA realized their mistake and cleared it. Or I could do something. I wasn't going to let a snow pile or one angry neighbor keep me locked in my own driveway. I went back inside, heart pounding a bit, thinking through my options. Karen had no idea I had connections in the city's public works department. A few months back, I had casually mentioned to a friend there that I was interested in helping out with neighborhood issues, and they gave me their number just in case. I figured now was the time to use it. I picked up my phone and dialed. My hands were shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from the rush of adrenaline. I explained the situation quickly but calmly. The operator listened, surprised but understanding. She told me they had plows nearby and could send help if needed. I told her, this isn't just about clearing snow. It's about standing up for myself. There's a pile blocking my driveway, dumped by the HOA at my neighbor's request. She promised to send someone as soon as possible. While waiting, I went back outside and looked at Karen, who was now glaring at me from her porch. I caught her eye and gave a small nod. No words. Just a silent message, this wasn't over. The snow was falling lightly again, but this time it felt different. Instead of peaceful, it felt charged, like the calm before a storm of my own making. And then, I heard the rumble. The sound of engines rolling down the street. One snowplow. Then another. And another. What happened next was something no one expected. Any tweaks here before that? Sure. Here's section 2, continuing the story naturally and engagingly, around 700 words, flowing smoothly without a conclusion or summary. The rumble grew louder and louder until I could see the flashing lights of not one, but several city snowplows rolling down the street. They came in a steady line, engines humming, ready to work. It was almost like a parade, except this was no celebration. This was a convoy coming straight for Karen's snow fortress, and more importantly, for my buried driveway. I stepped back onto my porch, watching as the first snowplow slowly approached the pile blocking my garage. The driver waved at me through the window, nodding as if he already knew exactly what to do. I felt a surge of relief mixed with excitement. Things were finally turning in my favor. The plow pushed forward, blades scraping the pavement, breaking through the packed snow wall. The pile started to crumble and shift, pieces sliding away as the snowplow worked its way closer to my car. It was satisfying to see that snow, which had felt like a prison only moments before, melting away under the power of heavy machinery. Neighbors began to peek out of their houses, some with phones ready, probably wanting to capture what was happening. I caught a few curious looks from down the block. Word must have traveled fast because soon, more plows arrived, each one joining the procession like reinforcements in a battle. The street was alive with the sound of engines, the crunch of metal against ice, and the faint chatter of people watching this unusual scene unfold. Karen, meanwhile, stood on her porch, arms crossed, clearly unsettled by the arrival of the city's heavy hitters. Her confident smirk had disappeared, replaced by a frown and worried glances. I could tell she hadn't expected me to act so quickly or to have such powerful allies. Her plans to trap me with a wall of snow were falling apart in real time. The second plow cleared the sidewalk in front of her house, pushing snow to the side, making the street look cleaner and wider. It was almost symbolic, her own space getting cleaned up by the very people she had tried to use against me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. I pulled out my phone and called a couple of friends who lived nearby. "You won't believe what's happening," I said. "The city snowplows just showed up in a convoy because Karen buried my driveway." They laughed, amazed at the story, but also rooting for me. I knew they wanted me to win this silent neighborhood battle. The plows kept working their way down the street, clearing more than just my driveway. Streets were opening up, sidewalks were freed, and cars that had been stuck or buried were now able to move again. It was like a neighborhood rescue mission, and I was leading it. At one point, I saw Karen's husband come outside, looking confused and a little embarrassed. He glanced at the snowplows, then at the melting pile in front of our house. I caught his eye and gave a small nod. No hard feelings, just a silent message. This is how neighbors should treat each other, fairly and with respect. Meanwhile, the city plow drivers worked like pros, coordinating with each other over their radios. I could hear bits of their conversation, a mix of small talk and instructions, something about clearing main roads first, then working on residential streets like ours. But when they arrived, I made sure to explain the situation again, just so they understood why this street was getting special attention. By the time the last plow finished clearing the area, my driveway was spotless. No snow pile left, no obstacles in sight. The path was wide enough to drive through comfortably. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my chest. Freedom had been restored, and in a way, justice too. Karen's expression was hard to read now. She was quiet, standing at the edge of her porch, watching everything without saying a word. Maybe she was thinking twice about what she'd done, or maybe she was just plotting her next move. Either way, this moment was mine. The neighbors started to come out more confidently now, some even waving at the plow drivers, thanking them for their work. A few of them approached me, asking what had happened, how I got the city involved so fast. I shrugged and smiled, keeping it simple. Sometimes, you just have to stand up for yourself. While the snowplows packed up and prepared to leave, I noticed a few people taking pictures and videos from their phones. Word would spread quickly on our neighborhood chat group for sure. I imagined the messages already being typed. Did you see the snowplow convoy? All because Karen tried to bury someone's driveway. In the background, I saw the HOA plow truck leaving the street, slower and less efficient now, with no snowpiles in sight. It was clear that my call to the city had made a big difference. This was about more than just snow, it was about who holds the power in this neighborhood, and who's willing to use it wisely. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in, the fresh, clear driveway, the quiet hum of engines fading away, and the eyes of my neighbors on me. It felt good to know I hadn't backed down. That I had turned a frustrating, unfair situation into a victory, without shouting, without fights. The snow continued to fall lightly, dusting the street in white again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a blockade. It was just snow, meant to be cleared, not to be used as a weapon. And if anyone tried to throw up walls or bury me again, I knew I had friends and tools on my side to clear the way. The day went on, but I kept thinking about how small actions, like a quick phone call, could change everything. How sometimes, you don't have to get angry or lose your cool to win. You just have to be ready, be smart, and never let anyone push you around. And maybe, just maybe, Karen learned that day that messing with your neighbor's driveway isn't the best way to settle a score. After the last snowplow rolled away, the street slowly returned to its usual calm. The crunch of snow underfoot was the only sound left as neighbors started moving about again, clearing sidewalks and stepping carefully over patches of ice. But even as life went back to normal, the tension in the air didn't completely disappear. Karen still stood on her porch, arms folded, watching me with that familiar cold stare. I wasn't sure if she was mad, embarrassed, or maybe even plotting her next move. But I knew one thing: I had just changed the game in this neighborhood. No longer was I someone to be ignored or pushed around. I had made a statement, and everyone had seen it. The following days were interesting, to say the least. People who usually kept their distance started coming over to chat, offering support and sharing their own stories about difficult neighbors or HOA troubles. Turns out, Karen wasn't the only one with a history of stirring things up. The HOA itself had a reputation for being overly strict and sometimes even unfair. I got messages from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, thanking me for standing up to the nonsense. A few even said they were inspired to speak up more themselves. It felt good, like maybe this snowplow incident had sparked something bigger than just a cleared driveway. At the same time, the HOA started acting a bit differently. I noticed fewer plow trucks showing up to make questionable snow piles, and the usual nitpicking about lawn decorations and trash cans seemed to ease up. It was like they realized the neighborhood wasn't going to be pushed around so easily anymore. Of course, Karen didn't disappear quietly. She still left those icy glares and snide comments when we crossed paths, but they didn't bother me as much anymore. I'd built a little armor during that snowy battle, a confidence that said I wasn't going to be silenced or bullied. One afternoon, a few days after the snowplow convoy, I was outside doing some yard work when I saw Karen struggling with her own snow situation. Her driveway was half blocked by a large, frozen chunk of ice. It was obvious she hadn't bothered to clear it properly, and now she was stuck. Something about that scene made me pause. There was a moment when I could have ignored it, maybe even smiled to myself, remembering the mess she made in front of my house. But instead, I grabbed my shovel and walked over. "Need some help?" I called out. Karen looked surprised, her expression softening for a second. Yeah. I guess this is a bit tougher than I thought." I spent the next half hour helping her break up the ice and clear a path so her car could get out. We didn't say much, just the usual small talk about the weather and how this winter had been rough. But that moment felt different. Like we were no longer enemies locked in a snowy standoff, but just neighbors trying to get through a tough season. That didn't mean everything was suddenly perfect. Karen was still Karen. She'd still complain about little things and find reasons to argue about HOA rules. But there was a new respect between us now, born from that snowplow incident and the unexpected teamwork afterward. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the neighborhood chat group, where people shared updates and vented frustrations. The snowplow convoy story had gone viral locally. Everyone loved it. The idea that one homeowner had called in the city and turned the tables on a controlling neighbor was a hit. Some people joked that I should run for HOA president next year. Others sent memes and funny comments about snow battles and plow power. The attention brought other things too. City officials started paying more attention to our neighborhood's concerns. After my call, they seemed more responsive to issues beyond just snow. Street repairs, lighting, trash pickup, all those small but important things improved. I couldn't help but think that maybe standing up once had opened the door for bigger changes. It wasn't just about Snow or Karen anymore. It was about a community finding its voice. About neighbors realizing they could work together rather than fight all the time. And about not letting a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch. Some days, when I look back at that snowy morning, I'm still amazed at how quickly things escalated. How a simple pile of snow could turn into a full-on neighborhood event. But it also reminds me how important it is to stand firm, even when it seems easier to stay quiet. I started noticing other homeowners who had been hesitant to speak up now joining in on conversations, asking questions, offering ideas. It felt like a wave of change was rolling through the streets, one plow at a time. Even Karen, in her own stubborn way, became a part of that story. Whether she liked it or not, she was a character in the neighborhood's new chapter, one where respect, fairness, and a little bit of humor won over petty fights and silent grudges. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One small act, a quick phone call, a convoy of snowplows, and suddenly, a frozen driveway becomes the spark for something bigger than anyone expected. Winter in our neighborhood had a way of bringing people together, or sometimes driving them apart. After the whole snowplow convoy incident, things definitely shifted. People started talking more, watching each other's backs, and even lending a hand when someone needed help clearing their driveway. It was almost like the snow had broken down invisible walls between neighbors. One morning, a week after the great snow battle, I got a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who lives a few houses down. She smiled and held up a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said. "That convoy of snowplows did a real number out here. You saved us all from being trapped." I thanked her and invited her inside for a quick chat. She told me stories about how she had struggled to get out of her driveway during storms, and how she'd always felt ignored by the HOA. Hearing her talk made me realize just how many people had been quietly suffering with the same problems I faced. It wasn't just Karen or me, it was a whole community. Word had spread fast about what happened with the snowplows. People in the neighborhood were starting to feel a little more hopeful, like maybe change was possible. I found myself answering questions from neighbors about how I got the city involved and what to do if the HOA crossed the line again. One afternoon, I was at the local grocery store when someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Tom, the guy who runs the corner deli. He grinned and said, "I heard about your snowplow convoy stunt. That was some smart move, man." We laughed, and he told me that even some of the city workers had talked about it, calling it one of the best neighborhood stories they'd heard in a while. But not everyone was thrilled. The HOA board caught wind of what I did, and let's just say, they weren't pleased. I started getting letters in the mail, formal complaints about disturbing the peace and unauthorized use of city resources. It was ridiculous, of course. All I'd done was ask for help clearing a snow pile that was illegally dumped in front of my house. Still, I decided to keep my cool. I knew playing their game wouldn't get me anywhere. Instead, I organized a neighborhood meeting at the community center. The turnout was better than I expected. People showed up with stories, frustrations, and ideas for making our neighborhood better. Some even shared experiences similar to mine, where the HOA had overstepped boundaries or created unnecessary problems. The meeting turned into a brainstorming session. We talked about how to hold the HOA accountable, how to improve communication between residents and the board, and how to avoid situations like the snowplow incident in the future. It was energizing to see so many people ready to work together instead of just complaining behind closed doors. Karen didn't show up, of course. I wasn't surprised. But I did hear from some neighbors that she was grumbling about the meeting, saying it was a waste of time and that things should stay the way they were. Classic Karen. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to city officials more often, asking about programs for neighborhood improvements and safety. The Snowplow convoy had opened a door, and I wasn't going to let it close. I wanted to make sure everyone knew their rights and had access to resources that could help. One cold evening, as I was walking home, I noticed a group of kids playing in the freshly shoveled sidewalks. Their laughter echoed through the street, a sign that life was moving forward, no matter the winter chill. It was a small moment, but it stuck with me, the idea that sometimes, standing up for yourself can create a ripple effect far beyond what you expect. That night, I sat down at my computer and started writing a post for the neighborhood chat group. I shared tips on dealing with snow removal, how to report issues to the city, and reminded everyone that we're stronger when we work together. The responses came flooding in, people thanked me, shared their own stories, and even offered to volunteer for community projects. Through all this, I learned that dealing with difficult neighbors or a tough HOA isn't about fighting fire with fire. It's about knowing when to ask for help, staying calm, and finding smart ways to protect yourself and your home. And sometimes, it means turning an annoying snow pile into an opportunity to bring your community closer. Looking back, it's crazy how a little snow could stir up so much drama. But it also showed me how important it is to stand your ground and not let others push you around. The Snowplow convoy wasn't just about clearing a driveway, it was about clearing a path for change. And the best part? The neighborhood was finally starting to feel like a place where people look out for each other, even when the weather tries to throw its worst at us. Winter kept coming with more snowstorms, but this time, the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't just the cleared driveways or the freshly shoveled sidewalks, it was the spirit of the people. The Snowplow convoy had sparked something unexpected, a shift in how we all saw each other. No longer were we just neighbors living side by side, we were a community that had faced a challenge and come out stronger. Karen was still around, of course. Her icy glares and sharp comments didn't completely disappear, but they lost some of their power. I noticed that even she started nodding politely when we crossed paths, though she never admitted defeat. Sometimes, I think she respected the fact that I wasn't going to back down anymore. One morning, after another heavy snowfall, I was surprised to see not just city plows but a few neighbors with their own snowblowers and shovels working together down the street. It felt like a team effort, like everyone wanted to keep the neighborhood safe and accessible without waiting for the HOA or city officials to step in. I grabbed my shovel and joined them. We worked side by side, chatting and laughing, making a tough chore into a chance to connect. A couple of kids helped too, making snowballs and building little forts nearby. The mood was light, even as the snow kept falling. That day, I realized how far we'd come since Karen had buried my driveway. What had started as a frustrating act of sabotage turned into a story that brought people together. The neighbors who once barely said hello were now sharing tips on snow removal and swapping contact numbers to check in during storms. But the real surprise came when the HOA called a meeting. Not to complain or boss people around, but to discuss new policies based on feedback from residents. It was clear they had noticed the shift in neighborhood energy and maybe even felt a little pressure to change. At the meeting, things were different from before. The HOA board listened more and talked less. Residents spoke up openly about their experiences and what they wanted to see improved. Some even brought up the Snowplow convoy incident as an example of what can happen when people take initiative. Karen, true to form, still argued on a few points, but she was quieter and less confrontational. I think the Snowplow convoy had shaken her more than anyone expected. Seeing the neighborhood rally around me must have been a wake-up call. The meeting ended with plans to improve communication between the HOA and residents, create clearer guidelines for snow removal, and even organize community cleanup days after storms. It felt like a fresh start. Afterward, a few neighbors stopped me to say thanks for standing up that winter. It wasn't just about the snowplows, it was about showing that one person could make a difference. I started thinking about what else we could do to keep that momentum going. I reached out to the city again, this time about adding more public trash bins and better street lighting. The response was positive, and soon crews were installing new lights and bins in key spots. Little improvements like these made the neighborhood feel safer and more welcoming. Meanwhile, Karen's attitude softened a bit more. I caught her helping a neighbor shovel snow one afternoon, something I never thought I'd see. She even waved at me across the street, a small gesture but one that said a lot. I realized then that change doesn't happen overnight. It's slow and sometimes messy, with setbacks and surprises along the way. But when people come together, even the coldest winters can warm up. Through it all, I kept sharing updates and tips with neighbors, encouraging everyone to stay involved and speak up when things weren't right. The more we worked together, the easier it became to handle whatever challenges came our way. The Snowplow Convoy wasn't just a one-time event. It was the beginning of a new chapter for the neighborhood, one where people felt heard, respected, and ready to face whatever winter or life threw at them. And honestly, that made all the difference. Spring was just starting to creep in when I noticed something new around the neighborhood. After months of snow, cold, and frozen driveways, the streets looked brighter not just because the sun was out more, but because people seemed happier and more connected. That winter and the Snowplow Convoy had changed something more than just the physical space, it had shifted the mood. One morning, I was out watering my plants when a few neighbors stopped by, carrying coffee and fresh pastries. They said they wanted to say thanks again for everything, the way I stood up and didn't back down when things got tough. It wasn't just about the snow or Karen's stunts anymore. It was about standing up for yourself, for fairness, and for community. The neighborhood was buzzing with plans for spring cleanups, block parties, and even a little garden contest. People were stepping up in ways I hadn't seen before. It felt like the Snowplow Convoy was the spark that got everything rolling. Even Karen was quieter these days. She still had that sharp edge, but there were fewer confrontations, fewer icy looks. One afternoon, I saw her outside trimming her bushes, and I waved. To my surprise, she waved back with a small smile. It was awkward but real. Sometimes, small changes make a big difference. The HOA meetings had also evolved. Instead of being tense and filled with complaints, they became more productive. Residents and board members worked together, hashing out plans and listening more carefully. I started attending regularly, sharing what I'd learned about working with city officials and building neighborhood support. One issue that came up often was how to better handle emergencies, especially snowstorms. After all the trouble with Karen burying my driveway, everyone wanted clear guidelines and quicker responses. We worked on a plan to create a neighborhood emergency contact list and a schedule for helping each other during tough weather. The local city council also got involved. After hearing about the Snowplow Convoy story, they agreed to increase funding for neighborhood services and improve communication during storms. It felt like our little corner of the city was finally being heard. One weekend, the city hosted a neighborhood safety day event, and I was invited to speak. I told the story of how the Snowplow Convoy came to be, emphasizing the power of standing up and asking for help. The crowd was supportive, and many came up afterward to share their own experiences. Back home, the snow had melted completely, replaced by blooming flowers and green grass. Kids played outside, neighbors chatted on porches, and there was a general feeling of optimism in the air. The streetlights that were installed over the winter cast a warm glow in the evenings, making everything feel safer. Still, not everything was perfect. Karen occasionally stirred up minor disagreements about HOA rules or garden boundaries. But those moments were fewer and less intense. I think she realized the neighborhood was no longer a place for petty battles. One evening, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few months. The Snowplow Convoy had been a moment of frustration, but also a turning point. It reminded me that sometimes, the things that seem like obstacles can become opportunities if you're willing to take a stand and bring people together. I started thinking about other ways to help keep the neighborhood strong. Maybe organizing regular meetups, or setting up a community bulletin board where people could share news and events. The possibilities felt exciting. As spring turned into summer, the neighborhood continued to grow closer. Barbecues, block parties, and simple chats over the fence became the new norm. The story of the Snowplow Convoy became part of our shared history, a reminder of how even the coldest moments can lead to warmth and unity. Looking around, I could see that standing up for myself didn't just clear a driveway. It cleared the way for a better neighborhood, one where people cared about each other and worked together. And that feeling, it was worth every snowy minute. The summer brought more sunshine and longer days, but it also brought new challenges and new opportunities. After the winter's snowplow saga, the neighborhood was buzzing with energy, and everyone seemed eager to keep that momentum going. What started as a simple fight over a driveway had turned into something much bigger, a community coming alive. One afternoon, as I was mowing my lawn, I noticed a group of kids setting up a lemonade stand at the corner. It was their first try, and their faces lit up when a few neighbors stopped by to buy drinks and chat. Little things like that were becoming more common. People were stepping outside, saying hello, sharing small moments. That same week, a few neighbors approached me with an idea. They wanted to organize a neighborhood watch program, something to help keep everyone safe and look out for each other. I agreed right away. After the Snowplow convoy and all the HOA headaches, it felt like we had built a foundation of trust, and this was the next step. We held our first meeting in someone's garage, with snacks and folding chairs. It was a mix of young and old, new and long-time residents, all sharing ideas about how to keep the streets safe and build stronger connections. We talked about setting up a group chat, sharing emergency numbers, and even organizing patrols during late hours. The energy was contagious. People who had barely spoken before were now swapping phone numbers and planning weekend patrols. The idea of a safer, friendlier neighborhood wasn't just talk anymore, it was happening. Meanwhile, Karen was quieter than ever. The old tension seemed to have faded, replaced by a cautious distance. I heard from a few neighbors that she'd started volunteering at the community center and even helped organize a neighborhood cleanup day. It was hard to believe, but it looked like she was softening in her own way. One afternoon, I saw her helping an elderly neighbor rake leaves. I waved, and she nodded back, almost shyly. It wasn't a grand peace treaty, but it was a start. Around that time, the HOA called another meeting, this one focused on neighborhood safety and community events. The tone was different, less formal, more open. Board members asked for input, and residents didn't hesitate to speak up. I shared what we were doing with the neighborhood watch and encouraged everyone to get involved. The response was positive, and for the first time, it felt like the HOA and residents were truly working toward the same goal. The city also pitched in. They sent officers to meet with us, offered safety workshops, and even helped set up better lighting on some of the darker streets. It was clear that our small neighborhood had caught their attention, and in a good way. With summer in full swing, the block parties and barbecues kept getting bigger and better. Kids played in the sprinklers while adults shared stories and laughter. The sense of community was undeniable. One evening, as the sun set and fireflies lit up the yards, I found myself thinking about how much had changed since that snowy morning when Karen buried my driveway. It was hard to believe it had been just a few months. What felt like a personal battle had become a neighborhood revival. I thought about all the people who had stepped up, neighbors I'd never talked to before, city officials who listened, even Karen, in her own slow way. It was a reminder that sometimes, the hardest moments can lead to the strongest bonds. Later that week, I got a call from a local reporter who wanted to do a story on the neighborhood's turnaround. She'd heard about the Snowplow convoy and wanted to share how one person's stand had sparked a community movement. We met at the park, and I told her the story, the frustration, the fight, and the unexpected friendships that followed. She seemed genuinely interested, and I could tell the story would inspire others facing similar struggles. As summer faded into fall, the neighborhood remained close-knit. We planned ahead for winter, sharing snow removal tips and making sure everyone had help lined up. The lessons from last winter stuck with us all. And while Karen still had her moments, the neighborhood had grown beyond her influence. We were stronger, united, and ready for whatever came next. That summer, beneath the warm sun and clear skies, I realized something important. Sometimes, it takes a pile of snow and a little courage to bring people together. And when that happens, even the coldest winters can lead to the warmest friendships.